Fred pulled into his driveway. It was a nice sunny afternoon, and he had just dropped their youngest, Dave, off at his grandparents' for the weekend. Sharon's parents adored their youngest, who was already 8 years old. His sister, Jane, was 20 years old and her brother Jason was 19, so having a little one around to spoil him silly was a dream come true for them. With his two eldest already in college, Fred was looking forward to spending the rest of Saturday with his wife. This was our time, as he liked to put it. She and Sharon worked hard raising their 3 children and deserved these few moments of togetherness. He found his wife in the kitchen with a mug of coffee in her hand. She looked serious. In fact, she had been a little distracted the past few days. Fred suggested that after her older children moved out, the empty nest syndrome seemed to be starting to get to her. He poured himself some coffee and sat down next to her. It was early in the day and lewd thoughts were running through his mind as he gazed lovingly at Sharon, who looked younger than her 45 years. With black hair and blue eyes, she looked quite attractive, and her regular gym sessions reflected in her slender figure. With a height of 175 centimeters and his height of 183 centimeters, they made a good couple. He was confident that he could lift Sharon's spirits. As he sipped his coffee, he saw Sharon staring into his eyes with a serious, thoughtful look. "This may require more than a couple glasses of wine. What's on your mind, honey?" he asked, trying to diffuse the situation. Sharon hesitated for a moment before answering. "Thank you, Fred, my wonderful man." Fred raised an eyebrow questioningly. "If this is for mowing the lawn, then it was my responsibility, and I was happy to do it." Sharon continued to stare at him, her eyes becoming moist. "Thank you for staying with me," she said again, with a meaningful look in her eyes and tears rolling down her cheeks. Fred froze, his eyes wide, his coffee mug frozen in the air in his hand. She knew. Damn it, she knew. After so many years. How? 9 years earlier. Fred looked at his watch for the 10th time. The evening traffic was moving at a snail's pace, and he had a plane to catch. Chicago really sucked at times. It will take him another hour to get home. This will give him some time to pack his things and catch a late evening flight to New York. Their company participated in a tender to perform information technology automation work for a new company involved in the stock market and with several branches throughout the country. Their company was among the chosen ones, and much depended on tomorrow's presentation at the headquarters in New York. He beeped in frustration, then opened his cell phone and called his wife. During the day, a woman came to them and looked after their children after they returned from school. It was time for her to leave home, and he needed to pack his travel bag. Damn. He hoped his wife didn't get caught in the evening traffic. She worked as a marketer for a company that produced creative furniture for small apartments. Their products were selling well, but so was competition, and their marketing team, including Sharon, was always on alert. Sharon answered the phone. "Hey, handsome, don't forget that you have a plane to catch." "Honey, the traffic is terrible, and it's time for Miss Morrison to leave, and—" Sharon intervened before her husband could finish his words. "Now, while you're talking, sir, I'm turning into our driveway. Your children, our are safe. The cavalry is already here," she replied in a loving tone with a slight grin. Fred sighed in relief. This woman was wonderful. Even after a hectic day and driving through the crazy evening of Chicago, there was not a trace of irritation in her tone. "And you will find your travel bag ready," she continued in the same joking tone. This stupid husband of hers could really go crazy sometimes. She loved him and all his moods. Half an hour later, Fred reached home. This was going to be a serious matter. He couldn't afford to miss the plane. Sharon was driving a used car, and if all goes well, he'll surprise her with a new SUV. He could afford it with the bonus he expected to receive if he coped with this matter. The children squealed with delight and rushed to hug him. He heard his wife cooking something wonderful in the kitchen. He walked over and kissed her quickly. Sharon smiled. "Now quickly change clothes. You have little time before departure." Fred quickly showered and changed into casual clothes for the flight. He went downstairs to eat a few bites of his wife's wonderful cooking. Easy, Fred, eat properly, Sharon said with concern. Fred nodded his head as his mouth was full. He heard an Uber honking behind him. He kissed his family and hurried to the airport. The meeting went well. Clients were pleased with his demonstration. What really impressed them was that his company would complete installations in less time than other competitors and at a lower cost. Fred returned home with a big smile on his face. It was good teamwork. As he had hoped, management recognized his efforts by promoting him to regional manager of ongoing installations at another customer center in Fort Wayne. And yes, he received a wonderful raise. Now he could buy a new SUV for his wife. She deserved it. Sharon carefully backed her brand new SUV into the company parking lot and walked out proudly. The car was great. She liked her. It was love at first sight. Fred made a surprise. He brought the family to the Honda showroom in a casual manner, telling them to look around, and when she saw the shiny white SUV, well, it was love at first sight. Fred grinned the whole time. When she said it was getting late and they had to go, he sauntered up to the manager and said they were buying this SUV. Sharon smiled happily, remembering that she almost fainted. Her new SUV was the talk of the office that day. The best part was that she could impress her clients by driving to their office in her SUV. As a marketing professional, she knew that little things like that make a difference in how negotiations go. This, as it were, inspired her to do even more successful work in order to be shoulder to shoulder with her husband. Everything was fine with them, and she thanked the Lord for that. She threw herself back into work. The next day, she had to meet with several clients in Madison. To do this, she needed to catch a morning flight, spend the day in tense negotiations, and then return home on an evening flight. To do all this, she had to first finish pricing the product, emphasizing its comparative advantages over what competitors were selling. Sharon was looking forward to returning from Madison and spending some time with her family. They both climbed the proverbial corporate ladder. Their hectic and busy office and family schedule exhausted them to the limit, and many times they simply fell asleep in each other's arms. An old Beatles song called "It's Been a Hard Day's Night" was close to their way of life. It's funny how a song from the 60s can still be relevant today. She called her husband to remind him about the upcoming trip. "Fred, I'm taking an early morning flight to Madison. I hope you haven't forgotten." "No, baby, my travel calendar is clear for the next couple of days, although I need to go to Fort Wayne when you get back. The new server we're installing needs an upgrade, and I need to be there. I'm planning to be back by Friday evening." "Oh, I was hoping for a family outing this Friday. The children want to go to the new cafe that their friends have been talking about. Anyway, we'll plan something later." That evening, Fred helped around the house while Sharon prepared for the morning flight. According to their agreement, Fred would take her to the airport in the morning and then return to get the children ready for school. A few weeks later, Fred checked the list of things he had written down to do. Sharon will be back from Milwaukee early in the morning, and he will pick her up from the airport as usual. Late in the evening or early in the morning, taking Uber from the airport was not very safe. It's not that anything bad happened, but you could hear on the news that wrong things were happening. He started checking off the things he had completed. The SUV was serviced at the dealership's service center. He was almost a year old, and they still had a few free service coupons left. Then he checked the box next to the washing machine. It was repaired and worked properly. Finally, he reached the last item marked flash drive. This really should have been the first point. He said to himself, the flash drive contained old information about work to create a network for a client in the city of Madison. He had to go there in a couple of days, and he needed to review everything from the beginning. And where is this flash drive now? Fred started in his office. He checked all the boxes. No, she wasn't there. He went into the bedroom and started rummaging. Finally, he found it in the bottom drawer, almost hidden among old bills and receipts. "I have to clean up this mess," Fred muttered to himself. With their ever-busy work schedules, the house was often a mess. He began tearing up the old bills one by one to make sure he didn't throw out anything important. While he was doing this, One piece of paper caught his attention. It was Sharon's airline ticket from Milwaukee to Chicago, dated a month or so ago. He remembered Sharon telling him that they had clients there. There was nothing unusual about this, but this ticket for a return flight from Milwaukee to Chicago was booked for a morning flight. Fred tried to remember how many other morning flights his wife had taken to get back to Chicago. No one. And then another thought struck him. He clearly remembered that some time ago, Sharon was returning from Milwaukee on an evening flight. So why did the trip plan change, and also only for Milwaukee? Then he shrugged his shoulders and began tearing up old bills. Perhaps he read too much about it. He began working on the City of Madison project. The plane ticket continued to sit in the back of his mind. As the days progressed, both Fred and Sharon worked diligently to complete their assigned tasks, both at the office and at home as responsible parents. Sharon smiled as Jim entertained her with one of his funny jokes. He was charming and a good conversationalist. Even during meetings in the office, he managed to maintain a light atmosphere, as nerves usually flared during negotiations. There was something relaxing about him, and she felt comfortable in his cheerful company. He was definitely useful to his company. She remembered the last time she was in Milwaukee to sell their new product. Jim was as professional as possible in trying to get the price down, but after they completed their business, he took her to an old carnival that was taking place in town. At first, she was reluctant because she had a late evening flight home, but Jim was so convinced that she got a new ticket for the morning flight. It was worth it. She thoroughly enjoyed the trip. Now she's back in Milwaukee. They had good clients in Milwaukee, and she had to visit that city every 2 weeks. Meeting Jim in her client's office always lifted her spirits. This time, Jim got tickets to a restaurant where good old Charleston dance music was playing. It had been a long time since she hit the dance floor, and it was wonderful. They danced several numbers performed by the orchestra, and regularly drinking wine while listening to music lifted her spirits. Dinner had long ended, but Jim still continued his fascinating stories. "You know what, Sharon? Why don't we go out to the terrace and drink the rest of the wine? The view from there is great, especially on a full moon night like this." Sharon looked at the bottle. She has already exceeded her quota. Maybe one more wouldn't hurt, she thought to herself. "I hope the walk to the terrace is as good as you promise, otherwise we can drink a bottle here," Sharon giggled. She was already tipsy. "I am a liar?" Jim responded with a mock-serious and offended look, which made Sharon giggle again. This guy was priceless. They took the elevator to the top floor, Jim carrying a bottle of wine and glasses. The wind hit her face as Sharon stepped out onto the terrace. Jim was right. There was a full moon in the sky, illuminating the city with its moonlight. "It is wonderful," Sharon exclaimed as the wind blew her hair across her face. "And so calm and peaceful." Sharon enjoyed the tranquility of the moonlit night as they continued to chat and sip wine. Sharon was in a light mood when she noticed him staring at her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Jim kissed her. During the kiss, Sharon felt something inside. "What is this?" she asked, half amused. "The beauty of this moonlit night fades in front of this wonderful woman," Jim answered, still holding Sharon's hands. Sharon laughed. Flattery was good. "You can talk, Jim," she replied, with a sparkle in her eyes. No one spoke for several moments. "Let's go down," Sharon finally said. They went down to Sharon's floor and Jim led her into her room. Sharon opened the door and turned around. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Jim," she smiled. "I was very pleased," he replied, making a small low bow, which amused Sharon a lot. "Good night, Sharon," he said and left. Sharon was on edge, both from too much drinking and Jim's flirtatious nature. She knew that he was raising his young daughter alone since his wife had died in a tragic road accident several years ago. He was tall, with a stern look, and lonely. She understood why he was flirting with her. She hoped Jim would find a woman soon. She was sorry to see such a good guy like him lonely. Fred smiled and waved to his children, who raced past him in their little cars, happily crashing into each other. They were located in the Oak Brook Center, where there were some good games for the kids. A good way to attract families, he thought. Otherwise, children become bored and mothers do not have time to do their shopping properly. Sharon was busy shopping, and he was put in charge of the children. He saw many other fathers playing the same role. The week went well, both in the office and at home. He was named team leader for an ongoing project in Fort Wayne. It meant a lot. He could get a good promotion with a corresponding increase in salary and benefits. Then they will be able to afford a more spacious house in one of the most famous areas of the city. Life at home has been good too, for the last 10 days or so. Luckily, they both didn't have to travel much. They had a good time with their family. Sharon was in a great mood, especially after her last trip to Milwaukee. Too bad he'll be leaving soon for a project in Fort Wayne, this time for a whole week. Fred had been gone for 5 whole days, and she was managing things at the office and at home alone. At times, it was stressful. A trip to Milwaukee was coming up soon. Her company wanted to meet a new client and do some good marketing. So, 2 meetings almost one after the other. She needed to prepare these damn presentations for a potential client. The company promised her a good raise if she got this new client. She took another sip of whiskey. She usually avoided strong drinks, but loneliness bothered her. She needed Fred. On Saturday morning, Fred got out of an Uber in front of his house. He felt happy. The trip to the client in Fort Wayne went well, and the IT system installation went according to plan. Now he was looking forward to a pleasant weekend at home with his family. Perhaps after Sharon returned from Milwaukee, they could send the kids to their grandparents and hang out together for the weekend. It had been almost 3 weeks since her last trip to Milwaukee, and Sharon was looking forward to seeing Jim. She smiled, remembering the way Jim had flirted outrageously with her during her last visit. He was impudent, but she didn't feel offended. This suited his extroverted nature, and she was determined to set him up on a few blind dates. She hoped one of the girls would pick him up. He was definitely a nice person, and she felt sorry for him as he was raising his daughter alone. This girl will definitely need her mother when she grows up. This morning, Sharon had a meeting with potential clients. The client was a new construction company specializing in the construction of affordable apartments for middle-income people. Obviously, their apartments would be quite compact in size, so every inch of space mattered. This is where Sharon's company came in handy. Since Dave was in Fort Wayne, she used her free evening time to prepare a strong presentation on this important issue. This interested management. They may have been new, but they knew the right questions to ask. Sharon answered questions like a true professional. This went on for several hours, and before they knew it, it was time for lunch. Since she was scheduled to visit Jim's office that afternoon, the client's management invited pizza and soda into the conference room while Sharon continued to explain the benefits of her company's products over the competition. By the time Sharon managed to drag herself out of their office, she was completely exhausted. The company's management highly appreciated her presentation and promised to send its team to Chicago in the near future. On the way to Jim's office, Sharon broke the good news to her company. They were delighted. "You will lead the team on our side in negotiations with them," said a pleased Mr. T. Friedman, "and you will receive a good interim bonus if we conclude this deal," he continued. Sharon was delighted, but right now she really needed all her strength to get through the afternoon session in Jim's office. And of course, Jim will be flirty and witty. She smiled inwardly, remembering his quick kiss during her last visit. Well, she had plans to tease him this evening. Two can play this game. She quickly checked the 2 phone numbers. She had to set up some blind dates with Jim. One of them was divorced, and the other lost her husband in Afghanistan. They both had a child. They conscientiously fulfilled their role as single parents. They were single and looking for a good man. She was confident that Jim would be able to impress them both. The meeting in Jim's office lasted 2 hours. Jim was as friendly as always. No one could have imagined that behind this complacent appearance was hiding a lonely man with a little daughter, mourning his wife. Her company wanted more business, but at a higher price. Even if the price increases, they will be better than most of their competitors because the quality of their products is much higher. Jim, like a true marketer, tried his best to keep the price the same. Sharon was ready for this and agreed to the discount, which she had already taken into account at this meeting. Finally, the meeting came to an end. Sharon got her way on pricing, even though Jim's company thought it had won the day by lowering prices. Sharon went to the toilet. She needed a break. It was a long day. Sharon freshened up and quickly put on her makeup, all the while thinking about what surprise she had in store for Mr. Flirt tonight. Two can play this game. In the evening, Jim waited for Sharon in the hotel restaurant. He liked her. She had a good combination of beauty and intelligence. To be honest, he had feelings for her and was looking forward to a pleasant evening. He had already ordered a drink and was sipping happily when Sharon entered the restaurant. His eyes widened in surprise. Sharon wore an off-the-shoulder blue dress that fell to mid-thigh. The dress hugged her figure. For a mother of two, she looked gorgeous. She smiled, leaned forward, and kissed Jim on the cheek. "Hi, Jim. I hope I didn't force you. It's a long wait," she said, flashing a smile. She shampooed and permed her black hair into a more stylish look and was pleased to see that it had the desired effect on Mr. Flirt Jim. "It was worth it," he replied, gathering his strength. "Then pour me a drink, my good friend," she grinned in response. The rest of the evening was spent in the usual buffoonery and stupid conversations that she always looked forward to during her trips to Milwaukee. Sharon could see that he was completely mesmerized by her. Sharon winced at the pain in her legs. It had been a very stressful day, and her legs hurt. Despite drinking a lot, the pain continued to cause her discomfort. Jim noticed her discomfort. "Are you okay?" he asked sincerely in a concerned tone. "Today my legs don't give me rest." "I just have a solution for you," he replied, and immediately began dialing a number on his mobile. Sharon looked at him with half surprise. "I'm not kidding. Don't tell me you have some magic solution for me." He gave her a cheeky smile. "Magical no, magical yes, and it will be here in the next 15 minutes. Sharon sipped her wine while giving a fake, angry glare. "I hope it will be something good." "By morning, you'll want to go for a run," Jim answered self-confidently. "But before that, we need to get to your room. What I ordered will be delivered to your room." Sharon wondered what exactly he had planned, but she was ready. She had already drunk too much and was ready to call it a day. Jim took her hand to support her on her way to the elevator. They reached her room and Sharon quickly took off her sandals. She sat down on the sofa with her legs stretched out. Jim sat down next to her outstretched legs and began massaging her feet. The sensations were pleasant. "You ordered something magical, Jim. When will it arrive?" At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and he went to open it. The waiter handed him a bag with the ordered items. "The cavalry's here," he exclaimed triumphantly, holding the package high in his hand. Sharon laughed. This guy was so childish at times. He opened the package, took out a bottle of massage oil, and showed it to Sharon. She took the bottle from his hands and read the label. It was a bottle of expensive organic jojoba oil. "Oh my God," Sharon said with admiration in her voice. "It looks like you really have a solution to my problems." "Thanks, Jim. Maybe I'll rub it on my feet later," she continued, smiling to herself. She just might ruin Jim's plan to flirt with her. I think you should let me do this for you." It must be technical to achieve the desired effect. Sharon remained in her bed, thinking about what they had just done. She didn't plan this. The flirting got out of control. She went to the bathroom and took a long hot shower, as if trying to cleanse her body and soul of the remnants of the day. While Sharon was racked with guilt, Fred was miles away. The children were put to bed and all household chores were completed. He felt lonely. He missed his wife's company. Because of their hectic lives, he felt that they did not have enough our time for each other. They became like two roommates with common children. They needed change, he was sure of it. They couldn't continue like this forever. Perhaps more effort had to come from him, but change had to happen. There will be changes tomorrow. The next morning, Fred arrived at the airport to pick up Sharon from her flight to Milwaukee. As she walked out, Fred saw that she had a drawn-out look in her eyes. There was something in her eyes when she saw him. "Hey, baby," he said, hugging his wife. "I missed you, and so did the kids." And again, for a fleeting second, that same expression appeared in her eyes. She hugged him back. "I missed you guys too," she replied. Fred looked at her carefully. She seemed to have something in her head, something she wanted to say, but for some reason she was holding back. "Are you okay?" "I'm just tired, Fred. It's been a very busy schedule, and I guess that's taking its toll." "Take the day off and relax in the bath," he replied. "And maybe I'll join you there," he continued, kissing her tenderly. Sharon's face instantly brightened. "That would be nice," she replied, giggling. The very thought of her husband being in the bath with her evoked pleasant sensations. Fred nodded. Once upon a time, they had fun together. As far as he remembered, it had been some time since he had initiated something like this for his wife. Suddenly, the pain in his leg increased again, and Sharon grabbed her husband's hand for support. "My legs hurt like hell," she moaned as her husband helped her into the car. "We'll do something about it." "I really think you should take the day off," he replied with concern. "In the morning, I need to submit a report on a new client." "Maybe I'll leave the office early," she replied, adjusting her sitting position to ease the discomfort. Fred nodded in agreement, but still couldn't shake the look on his wife's face as she walked toward him at the airport. "Has my husband really figured me out?" Sharon wondered. Throughout the flight home, she experienced inner turmoil. She felt guilty, very guilty. She couldn't understand what was happening to her in her relationship with Jim. What should have been a nice, quiet evening with Jim, perhaps with some flirting, turned into something else. She had sex outside of marriage. She couldn't look Fred in the eyes when he met her at the airport. Even her hug was semi-serious, as if clinging to Fred. He somehow had to understand that just a few hours ago, she had cheated on him. She continued to watch silently from the car. Fred looked at his wife. She bit her lower lip and looked out the window. He knew that this meant that his wife's thoughts were focused on something important. She usually asked him about the children and the latest neighborhood gossip. But not today. Today, she looked thoughtful and fussy. It was a trip to Milwaukee, and the first flight back to Chicago was late in the evening. True to her word, Sharon went to her office to prepare and submit a report on a new client and asked for the day off. Fred knew that his wife was going to return home early, so he called his boss and asked him to leave early because he was feeling a little sick. His boss was unhappy. He eagerly awaited progress reports on the Fort Wayne project. "Can you finish your report on Fort Wayne and then leave?" he asked, frowning. Fred thought for a while. If he did his best, even then he would not be able to leave before the usual evening time and would have to face the crawling traffic and get home late. No, he wanted to be home this evening before Sharon returned. "Boss, by tomorrow noon, it will be in your email inbox, I promise," he replied pleadingly. Mr. Willman reluctantly nodded his head and waved his hand. He was eager to finish the project in Fort Wayne ahead of schedule. The management promised him a substantial bonus for this. He will have to push and prod Fred to achieve this. Maybe send it back to Fort Wayne for on-site evaluation. Fred ran out of the office in a happy mood. He needed to buy something and was hoping to take advantage of the light movement. He rushed from one shopping center to another until he finally bought everything he wanted by the evening. The children were happy about his early return home and rushed to hug him. He hugged them back. He was pleased to see their happy faces. Most often, he came home only to say hello to the children, tinker with them a little, and then have dinner and go to bed. Miss Morrison was also glad to leave early. This didn't happen often. The first thing Fred did was, having gotten rid of the children, went to the matrimonial bedroom. He placed the glass on the bedside table and put one of his purchases in it. He pushed the package with the remaining things under the bed. When Sharon pulled into their driveway, she was pleasantly surprised to see Fred's car. "This guy is taking care of me. He remembered that I was going to come home early." She felt guilty, very guilty, for the way her body reacted to Jim. This shouldn't have happened. After all, she certainly wasn't the winner. She pulled herself together and entered the house. The children rushed to her. They had a wonderful day. First Dad, and now Mom returned home early. "Mom, look what Dad is cooking in the kitchen," Jane shouted, with a sparkle in her eyes. Sharon groaned internally. Her husband's culinary skills, or lack thereof, were well known among their friends and relatives. "I'm sure we'll all remember to appreciate it after we finish dinner, darling," she replied, her tone mockingly serious. Jane winked and smiled back. "Maybe we can also order pizza, Mom, as a backup option." Jason asked with a serious expression on his face. "Jason," Sharon replied edifyingly. "Okay, whatever you say," her son replied, shrugging and returning to his video game. Sharon was surprised to feel warm. Just being with her family, without being called directly from the office, seemed to activate her maternal feelings, which Mother Nature bestows only on women. She walked into the kitchen where her husband was trying to work some magic with the ingredients laid out on the kitchen island. She looked at his side profile, his almost perfect toned body, his graying sideburns, his jawline, and the serious look in his eyes as he created a magical delicacy for his family. Fred turned to greet his wife as she approached him and saw something in her eyes again before she suddenly flinched in pain. He grabbed her when she momentarily lost her balance and then hugged her. "Baby, I'm here," he whispered in her ear, meaning much more than the words probably meant. Sharon clung to her husband. "Now go upstairs and change. We're going to make the most of this family time." Sharon smiled and walked towards their bedroom. She walked inside, and her gaze fell on the pink rose standing in a glass on the bedside table. She looked so beautiful. All the pain seemed to leave her as if by magic. "Fred," she screamed in delight, raising her hands to her mouth. Fred put down the kitchen utensils and quickly walked into their room, a smile on his lips. Sharon held a pink rose in her hands and stroked it gently. "This is wonderful, Fred," she said in a soft, gentle voice, with a sparkle in her eyes that he knew well. Later in the evening, Fred decided it was time to surprise Sharon with another treat for the evening. He took a bottle of wine and 2 glasses and gave his wife a meaningful look, pointing the bottle towards their bedroom. Sharon saw the signal and dried her hands, having just finished washing the dishes. "Let me check on the kids, honey. Our girl is going to be a teenager soon, and I don't want us to make a bad impression on." Before she could finish speaking, Fred leaned over and kissed her on the lips. "I think we're okay, baby." She sees how much her parents love each other, and I'm sure this will have a positive influence on her that will help her in her adult life. "I don't know, Fred," Sharon answered hesitantly, looking again towards the children's room. They had a very pleasant evening. He thought he had done the right thing by prioritizing his home over office projects, but his wife's anxious expression in the airport lounge continued to bother him. Perhaps he was wrong, perhaps the reason for this strange look was the discomfort in her leg. He turned around, hugged his wife close to him, and closed his eyes. The next morning, Sharon went to work in her office in a happy, cheerful mood. The previous evening at home had been wonderful, but most of all, the pink rose lifted her spirits and made her happy. It was so thoughtful of her husband. She opened her purse, took out a pink rose, and placed it on a small glass bowl. The aroma was invigorating. Then she was overcome with guilt. How could she do this? Why the hell was she flirting with Jim? Why? Moreover, she invited him to her room for a massage. Was she really that stupid? Did she really not understand what a massage could lead to, especially when it involves a man and a woman, especially a drunk and stupid woman? No more flirting and definitely no more inviting Jim to accompany her to her hotel room, she decided. On the flight home, she was lost in thought, and when she saw her husband in the airport lounge, she half expected him to go with her to the nuclear power plant. But nothing of the sort happened. After all, Fred didn't know that a few hours earlier, she had been cheating with her office colleague. Sharon spent the entire day at the office with these conflicting emotions in her head, and by the time she got home, she felt more tired and exhausted than usual. The feeling of guilt took its toll. Fred watched his wife from the living room, where he was watching television. If in the morning she looked happy, now she looked absent-minded, as if detached. First, the milk boiled, which could have happened with his participation, but certainly not with Sharon. Then, after peeling the potatoes, she seemed to endlessly cut them into smaller and smaller pieces. Something was bothering her. "Are you feeling okay, baby?" he asked worriedly. She raised her head to meet his gaze, and he saw in her eyes the same haunted look he had seen at the airport. "No, nothing, honey. I'm just tired," she answered, trying to smile. For some reason, the smile did not reach her eyes, which continued to look at him. Fred didn't like what he saw and heard. There was something in the room with them. Has anyone been to Milwaukee? Are his initial instincts correct? He tried to figure out when her next trip to Milwaukee would be. If he was right, then it should happen next week. Well, he had plenty of time to plan something. Sharon continued to feel unwell the next day. Her feelings for Jim created a conflict within her that really shouldn't have happened. After all, she was married to a great guy and had a family who loved her. So what was it about Jim that attracted her to him? The next time she's in Milwaukee, they really need to talk. At that moment, there was a knock on the door of her office, and Mary, the secretary, entered with a package in her hands. "This just arrived for you by courier," said Mary. She put the package on the table and left. Sharon took the package and read the sender's name. It was from her husband. What is he up to? Sharon thought happily, unwrapping the package. Her eyes lit up, and she opened the note enclosed in the package. "Hi, baby. We have a date today. I'll pick you up from home at 7 in the evening. We have a table reserved at Tony's restaurant. Wear something nice." Sharon started giggling like a schoolgirl. Date. Her husband was going to ask her out. She is the mother of his 2 children, and this was in Tony's restaurant, which was known for its dance floor and good alcohol. It's going to be a fun evening. While she was walking, she started flirting with her husband on WhatsApp. "Fred, I'm a married woman." "I'm a married man," he answered. "I'm a mother. How can I stay out so late? What will my children think? They will understand. They know their mom is hot, and she deserves some time for herself and her man. By the way, I booked a hotel room for us so we could spend some time together after dinner at Tony's." Sharon smiled and sighed with pleasure. It would be fun, and she planned to leave early in the evening to get ready for the date. The children were pleasantly surprised to see their mother returning home early. "Hi, Mom. Good to see you," Jane said, and her brother nodded his head in agreement. "Hi, kids," Sharon replied and continued to walk briskly up the stairs. She needed to wash her hair with shampoo and then choose a beautiful dress for a date with her husband. Jane watched as her mother chose a dress and jewelry. "Where are we planning to go?" "I haven't finished my homework yet," she asked incredulously. "Baby, I have a date today," Sharon replied matter-of-factly. "What do you have?" Jane exclaimed in bewilderment. Sharon smiled to herself and decided to continue having fun with her daughter. "Yes, baby, my date will be here at 7 in the evening." "Mom, how can you go on a date?" "Why not?" Sharon replied, raising an eyebrow, enjoying this little discussion. "What will Dad think?" she objected angrily. Sharon didn't answer. Jane rushed downstairs and called her father. "Yes, baby," Fred said as he continued driving towards their house. He was wearing a new suit and his hair was beautifully styled. He also asked to leave work early. Needless to say, his boss was unhappy again, but Fred had his own priorities, and his family was more important to him than the office and the bonus. However, he promised his boss that he would go to the Fort Wayne site next week. This calmed his boss somewhat. "Don't get distracted, Fred. People like Francis are on your tail," Willman grumbled, dissatisfied. He was expecting a big bonus from management, but Fred seemed to have veered off course. Fred didn't miss the hint, but he knew it was more like a bluff on his boss's part, since people like Francis were far behind him when it came to successfully negotiating with clients. However, the boss needed to be amused and happy, so he included Fort Wayne in the tour schedule for the next week. "Dad, you better come home early. It's urgent," Jane said in a worried tone. "What's happened?" This is Mom. What's wrong with her, baby? She's getting ready to go on a date. Mom has a boyfriend, Jane answered conspiratorially. Fred realized that his wife had not told the children who she was going on a date with. He smiled and joined the game. Well, baby, your mother has a right to her own life, Fred replied with mocking seriousness. How can you say that, Dad? She's a mom, our mom. I don't care what you think, Dad. If you love me and Jason, then just come home. Jane stomped back into the kitchen and sat down next to her brother, who was playing some stupid game on his cell phone and seemed oblivious to the mundane affairs going on around him. Meanwhile, Sharon looked at herself in the mirror one last time. She chose to wear a silk cocktail dress with an off-the-shoulder neckline that showed off her cleavage. The hem ended just above the knees. Long legs and toned muscles were her advantage, and she was well aware of it. After taking one last look in the mirror, Sharon went down to the living room. Jason looked at his mother coming down the stairs with his mouth half open, having forgotten about the mobile game. He had never seen her so elegant and beautiful. After all, she was a mom and usually wore the things that all moms wear. Wow, Jason finally managed to say, his eyes still the size of saucers. Mom is going on a date, Jane told her brother. Wow, Jason said again, his mind unable to accept the fact that his mom might be going on a date, especially their mom. I just told Dad, Jane continued triumphantly. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Jane began to breathe heavily as she walked towards the main door, not sure if it was her father or her mother's boyfriend. With one last deep breath, she swung the door open and found herself face to face with her smiling father. She looked him up and down, taking in the new clothes and fashionable haircut, and then the realization of what was happening slowly dawned on her. Mom, your companion is here, she exclaimed before bursting into giggles. Thank you, honey, Sharon replied, walking up to her husband and kissing him tenderly. We'll be back a little later, so don't stay up on us, dear, and don't annoy Miss Morrison. Don't rush, guys. Don't rush as much as you need, Jane answered with a satisfied grin. Why will they be delayed? We have to go to school tomorrow, Jason asked in a concerned tone. Jane rolled her eyes. Go to sleep, brother. Sharon looked at her husband with admiration as they drove to the restaurant, taking in his stylish outfit and neat haircut. You look great, darling. It's an effect of the wonderful company I'm in, Fred replied in a light, humorous tone. Sharon blushed at the compliment. She liked this new image of her husband. They hadn't been anywhere together in ages, just the two of them, and she planned to enjoy every moment. That night at Tony's, the band was playing music for a twist. Fred took his wife's hand and led her onto the dance floor as the band began playing the classic Let's Twist Again, and soon they were kicking their feet to the beat. Time flew by as they alternated between the dance floor and the table to take a quick break and drink wine before returning to the dance floor. Fred looked lovingly at his wife as she swayed gracefully to the music. He was confident that he had done the right thing by reducing the number of hours he spent working, even though his boss didn't like it. Next week, he will definitely need to go to design work in Fort Wayne. He continued to look at his wife and then pulled her towards him. Baby, I booked us a room at the hotel across the street. Why don't we move the party there? He whispered conspiratorially. Fred, Sharon squealed with delight and then hugged her husband. Yes, yes. By the time they got home, it was already well after midnight. Sharon's face was flushed with happiness. The music and dancing were great, and the evening in the hotel room that followed was simply sensational. The next morning, Sharon somehow managed to wake up on time and begin her morning routine. At that moment, her phone, lying on the kitchen table, beeped, indicating an incoming WhatsApp message. Sharon looked down at the kitchen table and froze. It was a message from Jim. I just received a message from my boss about some new orders that need to be discussed with the staff in your office. I look forward to seeing you next Thursday. Memories of that crazy night came flooding back like a floodgate had opened. With a trembling hand, Sharon took the mobile phone, turned her back to her husband, and quickly deleted the message. She began to feel nauseous, so she carefully sat down and continued packing her lunch boxes. What she did was wrong, and she felt guilty. What made it even worse was that she was actually enjoying herself with someone other than her husband. Why did she like it? In the end, she cheated on her husband and her family. She had no answers to her questions. She suppressed a sob and continued working on her lunch boxes. The sudden change in his wife's mood did not go unnoticed by Fred, who continued to scroll through the morning news on his mobile phone, although he had lost all interest in it. He was distracted by the buzzing of his wife's mobile phone, and out of the corner of his eye, he noticed how his wife's expression changed, how she grabbed the phone and quickly turned away. He didn't like the various permutations and combinations that ran through his head to explain this sudden change of mood. In fact, there was only one very plausible explanation for some of the changes he had been observing lately, which had occurred since Sharon's flight back from Milwaukee that morning. It was then, sitting at the kitchen table, that Fred decided that he should visit Milwaukee, and his visit should coincide with his wife's trip. Milwaukee held the answers, he was sure of it. That day, Sharon was laconic and quiet in the office, so much so that her close colleagues approached her to ask if everything was okay. Sharon just smiled back and said nothing. It is unlikely that she could tell her colleagues that she was sleeping with a client to whom she was for some reason irresistibly drawn, and that a feeling of guilt was gnawing at her soul. Jim's prediction came true that afternoon when their boss called a quick meeting of the marketing and customer success team. Their customer in Milwaukee wanted to place a new order, but asked for a price renegotiation. They were talking about a large volume of purchases for an upcoming new project, and they believed that even if Sharon's company lowered their rates a little, given the volume of purchases, they would still make a handsome profit and even improve the performance of their new construction project. Their boss didn't mind, but wanted the accounts and marketing staff to show him the revised profitability figures. After that, Sharon was scheduled to meet with clients at their office the following Thursday. Sharon accepted the news silently. This meant that she would be with Jim again. At the same time that Sharon was attending a planning meeting for her next trip to Milwaukee, Fred was meeting with his boss about a project in Fort Wayne. Mr. Getty-Willman looked at him with his steely eyes. Fred was one of his star performers, and he expected great things from him. For the past few weeks, he's been working rather formally. He no longer showed that perky attitude. In the past, he didn't mind staying late to resolve technical issues or even move from one project site to another. Things looked different now, and Fred became more of a stickler for time. It had been quite some time since he had stayed late to deal with some urgent technical issues. Lately, he kept asking to leave work early. Fred, the Fort Wayne project has problems that require your attention, your complete, undivided attention. And it seems like you're not around. I mean, yes, you are here in the office, but not with the zest and enthusiasm that we admire. What came over you? We are behind schedule, and management is unhappy. If this delay continues, I will be forced to make changes to the team management. Sullivan gets good reports and is hot on your heels. I hope you understand what I mean, Willman continued, looking, no, not looking, at Fred through the smoke of his cigar. Bastard, Fred thought to himself. All he cares about is getting a fat bonus by completing projects ahead of schedule, and if rumors are to be believed, that's what his trophy wife liked best. She was 20 years younger than Willman and loved to spend money and have fun, which her previous husband could not provide. Willman had one and only one priority in life, and that was money. He may have blindly followed the same path in the past, but now his family has become his top priority. Sure, money was important, but as he'd realized lately, family needed quality time and attention. Investing time and energy into your family will yield greater returns in the long run than all mutual funds and stock options combined. Fred put on his best genuine smile before answering. Boss, you don't have to worry on my part. I know I'm cheating a little, but I'm going to close the Fort Wayne project much sooner than our clients could have ever dreamed, and I'm even planning on traveling to Milwaukee to meet with our prospects that you talked to Sullivan and I about. The idea of visiting Milwaukee had just occurred to him because Willman had not spoken to him about this client. Willman lived for bonuses, so Jim was sure that he would buy into them, and thus he could get answers to the questions that were nagging him. He knew Sharon would be there because she had sent him a text with plans for the upcoming trip. Mr. Poyles, Willman smiled happily back at Fred. This was what he wanted to hear. Perhaps he was right to mention Sullivan's name. That evening, Fred told his family about his plans for the week, not mentioning the trip to Milwaukee. In fact, he said he would be in Fort Wayne all week. He watched as his wife took the news that he would be away from home for a week. He hoped she wouldn't cancel her trip to Milwaukee because of the kids. She looked hesitant, and judging by the expression on her face, something was going on in her head. He decided to forestall her. Maybe your mom can come for a couple of days. I'm sure a few days won't cause them any inconvenience, he said. I still don't like the idea of leaving children alone, even with their grandmother. You know how kids are sometimes, she answered hesitantly. Fred turned to the children. You two will only spend a couple of days here at home with Grandma if you promise to behave. Do you guys promise this? We will, the children shouted in unison. Fred looked at his wife and shrugged. The next morning, Fred flew to Fort Wayne and immediately got to work installing the IT system, leaving his marital concerns aside. He planned to make his boss a truly happy man by the time he flew from Fort Wayne to Milwaukee. Every evening he called home as usual and talked to Sharon and the children. During these family conversations, he felt that Sharon was a little distant. Previously, she had asked him if he had met anyone interesting, in a friendly, joking tone. But now this was not the case. Her tone was not the same cheerful. Days passed by days, and finally it was time to go to Milwaukee and see the truth for myself. Before that, he called his boss and told him the good news. Their project was completed ahead of schedule. Willman was pleased. He showered Fred with praise and promised him a handsome bonus upon completion of the project. Fred did not react in any way to the monetary rewards promised to him. His thoughts were already elsewhere. Sharon watched as Jim defended the interests of his company, demanding lower purchasing prices. Her mind wandered, and she was only half listening to the conversation. She looked at his face, his strong jaw, his eyes that for some reason always smiled, and that cute dimple. Was this all she needed to start their romance? He was handsome, charming, and good company, but why did she do this? Was it because it was all illegal? As the meeting progressed, Sharon made occasional adjustments, but mostly continued to struggle with her inner turmoil, trying to rationalize what she was getting at. There is nothing wrong with being attracted to someone you like, but she has crossed a line that a married woman should never cross. Why did she feel so powerless? It was stupid of her, very stupid. She was flying into danger, and she really needed to get a grip on her emotions. Finally, the meeting came to an end, and everyone moved into the next room where coffee and snacks were served. Sharon moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, until she came face to face with Jim. That was a damn good presentation on my part, wasn't it? He said with a boyish smile. Sharon felt like there was a drug inside her. Warmth fades when she looks at his face with cute dimples, images on the cheeks. Sharon pulled herself together and looked straight into his eyes. Jim, we need to talk. Jim raised an eyebrow in confusion. First, I want to introduce you to the woman of my life tonight, and then I'm all yours, he answered with mocking seriousness, raising his hands in a sign of surrender. Sharon couldn't help but feel a hint of jealousy. Who was she? He had never spoken to her before about any woman in his life. When can I meet her? She finally asked. Sharon felt awkward about meeting Jim's mystery woman, and was also embarrassed to realize that while she was having an emotional and physical affair with Jim, he was also dating another woman whom he was more interested in. Higher pedestal than hers. This made her feel jealous. Tonight at my house, right after we leave the office, Jim replied and continued to monopolize her attention with his latest jokes. Fred looked at his phone clock for the 10th time. He was sitting in a rental car in the parking lot across from the hotel where Sharon stayed on her trips. He arrived that morning and went straight to their client's office. As luck would have it, the man in charge of their IT department had gone to the same college as Jim, having graduated 2 years earlier. They hit it off immediately, and by the end of the meeting, Fred was confident that he could get this contract for his company. He rested for a while in his room and then rented a car to spy on his wife's hotel. At about 5:45, he saw a Volkswagen pull into the parking lot and his wife got out of the car. She was dressed in a business suit and looked very beautiful and professional at the same time. The man driving the car also got out, joined his wife, and they entered the hotel together. The man was tall and decent-looking, perhaps several years younger than Jim. They weren't holding hands or stealing glances at each other, but their mannerisms clearly indicated that they were comfortable in each other's company and had probably met before. A knot formed in his stomach as he realized that his suspicions were coming true. Could this be the same guy his wife had an affair with? At first glance, he didn't see anything wrong or suspicious about him. In fact, he looked like a typical middle-class city dweller. Fred pondered what his next step should be. He was sure of one thing: he was not going to make any unpleasant scene at the hotel. He thought about his children at home, who were eagerly waiting for their parents to return, and if he started a showdown here and the hotel staff called the police, he would be in trouble. Besides, he had to know for sure. How? The answer was to catch them both in a hotel room. Then he remembered that he had a thick official envelope in his bag. He decided to fool the receptionist by waving it in front of his nose and saying that this urgently needed to be given to Sharon Miller, and she had to sign for receipt. If he behaves decently enough, the receptionist will inform him of the room number. Fred took the envelope in his hands, got out of the car, and entered the hotel, heading towards the front desk. And then he saw his wife's boyfriend sitting in the hall, sipping coffee and reading his mobile phone. This meant that they were not together in the hotel room. Fred quickly changed plans and instead asked the receptionist about the discounts he could get by booking a room for his office staff attending the seminar, and then quickly returned to his car. Now his thoughts were on edge. Perhaps they are planning to go out for dinner and then return for a feast later in the evening. Perhaps this explains why his wife chose to return on an early morning flight, no doubt after a good rest. Or they are just friends, and he has given vent to his imagination. After some time, he saw his wife leaving the hotel with her friend. Sharon changed into casual clothes for the evening out. They got into the man's car and drove off in the evening traffic. Fred started his car and followed them at an unnoticeable distance until they turned into a suburb of decent houses with neatly trimmed lawns and turned into the driveway of what was undoubtedly a man's home. Fred stopped the car a short distance away and turned off the engine. "So who is this mysterious woman? Where did you meet her?" Sharon asked as they drove in Jim's car to his house. "Let's just say I loved her from the moment she came into my life, and believe me, my life hasn't been the same since," Jim answered happily. Sharon internally winced as she realized she was having an affair with a guy who was also dating another woman. When Jim told her that his wife had died in an accident several years ago, she had simply assumed that he was not busy, but now she realized that he was not only dating her. Perhaps for him she was just a married woman who wanted something on the side. Or maybe that's how it was. After all, didn't she cheat on her husband? Nothing was sacred here, and tonight she really needed to talk to Jim. But first she needed to satisfy her curiosity about this other woman. They pulled into his driveway and Sharon got out. It was a quiet area with typical middle-class houses and neatly trimmed lawns. As they approached the house, the main door swung open and a little girl jumped out with her arms outstretched and her curly hair flying in all directions. "Dad!" she screamed and threw herself into his outstretched arms. Jim picked her up and turned to Sharon. "Sharon, meet my daughter Angie, the love of my life, the one I told you about." For a moment, Sharon didn't know what to say. All this time, Jim seemed to be playing with her, making her think that there was another woman in his life that he wanted to introduce her to. But in fact, it was the same sweet little daughter he was talking about. Jim, She began and stopped when she saw Jim smiling broadly back at her. Sharon just frowned at Jim and then turned her attention to the little girl. "Hi, Angie, I'm Sharon," she said and extended her hand towards the sweet girl. "Good evening, Miss Sharon," Angie answered seriously and took Sharon's outstretched hand into her small hands. Sharon felt her heart swell to the little girl. She was so sweet, just like her Jane at that age, and fate took her mother away from her. She hugged Angie, and they walked into the house hand in hand. Entering the house, Angie dragged Sharon to where she was playing with her dolls in the living room. She began introducing them to Sharon one by one. Sharon sat next to Angie and joined in the fun game. They decorated the dollhouse with tiny furniture and kitchen utensils. Sharon watched as Angie seriously examined their decorative work. Jim passed her a glass of wine and sat on a nearby couch, watching them play, before handing Sharon another glass of wine and retreating to the kitchen to prepare a quick dinner of tempura shrimp rice cakes. Angie immediately took a liking to Sharon and insisted that she help her eat dinner, giggling and laughing all the time. Sharon felt sorry for the child who was left without a mother, and she could well understand the child's natural affection for her. This poor child needed a mother in his life. She was pleased to see that Jim was doing a good job raising his daughter on his own. "Angie, it's time to go to bed. Say good night to your friend," Jim said after dinner was over, and Angie was excited and showed Sharon all her children's books. Angie's face dropped and Sharon's heart sank. Angie looked at Sharon with all the sincerity a child can muster and said, "Promise me you'll come to dinner again. Then you can read me a bedtime story from my books." Tears appeared in Sharon's eyes. She was there to discuss everything with Jim, and this girl had won her heart, and she couldn't lie to her that she would see her again. Sharon hugged Angie, holding her close for a moment, and then bid her good night, saying nothing in response to Angie's request. Sharon took the wine Jim offered as she watched Angie happily walk up the stairs to her room. "You really made her day." "I've never seen her so happy and excited," Jim said. Sharon saw his eyes fill with unshed tears. "She is very similar to her mother," he continued sadly. Sharon reached out and touched his face tenderly and motherly. "You miss your wife, don't you?" she asked in a soft, caring voice. Jim stood up silently, took out several family albums, and began showing them to Sharon. There were photos of Jim and his wife Debbie from when they were dating, and then some beautiful photos of their marriage, one of which showed Jim holding his newlywed wife in her wedding dress. Sharon placed the fourth empty glass of wine on the table and kissed it. They spent this night together. "Please take me to my hotel. I have a lot going on in my head, and I need to be alone." Jim shrugged and began to get dressed. Fred sat hunched over in his car. The FM station was playing old classic rock and roll, but he didn't care. His marriage was coming to an end. It had been over 2 hours since Sharon entered her lover's house. He was damn sure they slept together after his sweet daughter was put to bed. Or maybe, since there was a child in the house, maybe there was a lady in the house who didn't come out to greet Sharon, and it was a completely normal dinner. He had doubts because Sharon told him that she never went shopping in the cities she visited. Instead, she returned to the hotel, packed her things, went to the airport, and waited there for her overnight flight. However, Milwaukee was the only city from which she flew not at night, but on the next early morning flight. The dots seemed to be adding up, and he didn't like it. After an hour of sitting in the car, he thought about going up to the house and running into them, but the image of a pretty girl stopped him. He will meet Sharon at home. True, he did not have any photographs or any recordings of them together, but he would still run into his wife. After so many years of marriage, he could judge the truth by her reaction. After all, he knew he would have the hardest time of all. He would become a weekend dad every other week, and he would have to pay child support to Sharon even after the damage she had done to their family. It is likely that she will marry her lover and create a new home. Why did she do this to him? Was he not good enough for her? He knew that he was providing for his family well, and a couple of months ago, he bought a new Honda SUV for her. Was it sex? He was well aware that with their heavy office routine, They didn't get to spend much needed our time as often as they would like. To compensate, he cut back on his late hours and frequent trips out of town to avoid angering his boss. Or was her boyfriend a better lover? At that moment, a U2 song started playing on the radio. With you or without you, and tears rolled down his cheeks. Every word of the song seemed meant for him, and he felt his heart clench with pain. Fred saw the door open and Sharon came out, followed by a man. Her hair was styled differently than when she entered the house, and she looked as if she had just taken a shower. One look at her face confirmed his worst fears, and he sank into a chair. He knew his wife very well. They got into the car and drove off, no doubt returning to her hotel. That's all. His world as he knew it had just ended. All the efforts he made to pay attention to his wife, as he should have always done, were in vain, and Sharon threw him away. The U2 song continued as he sat sadly in the car, feeling lonely, very lonely and lost. He was a loser. He couldn't keep his woman. He had just lost his family, his children, whom he loved more than his own life. No matter what evidence he presents, not a single court in the country will give him custody of the children, even if their mother cheated on their father. The worst thing was the humiliation and feeling of betrayal. Sharon had to talk about what she felt was missing in their marriage. Perhaps they could try to do something about this together. Subsequently, if Sharon wanted to separate and get a divorce, it would be painful, but it would be a reasonable option for two adults who no longer want to stay together, but continue the affair while married to him. Why? Despair slowly turned to anger, and a glint of determination appeared in his eyes. Tomorrow there will be a showdown. He looked at the time. He needed to leave and prepare for an overnight flight in order to get home before his wife. He started the car and drove into the night, the radio playing softly. Fred stood at the airport exit waiting for Sharon's plane to land. He arrived a couple of hours early and didn't really sleep, just drank a mug of hot coffee and then found himself back at the airport. He always picked her up from the airport and didn't want to raise suspicion by missing this one. He watched her slowly walk out of the gate. Her shoulders were hunched and her face was deathly pale. He knew what was going on in her head. Why couldn't she wait until she got a divorce before dating another man? Was he so indifferent to her feelings? "Hey, honey," she called, giving him a small smile before hugging him. Fred didn't answer, although he didn't stop her from hugging him. If the worst happened, she would continue to be the mother of their children, and he would have to face her from time to time. "You look tired," he finally said. Sharon hesitated before answering. "But it was a long and difficult day. I hope everything went well," Fred asked, watching her from the corners of his eyes. She didn't answer. Instead, she continued to look ahead. "You look tired. Maybe we can talk later in the evening," he continued when she fell silent. She shuddered, but remained silent. Fred couldn't concentrate on work all day, as his thoughts kept returning to the moment when he saw Sharon leaving her lover's house. He had never felt so humiliated. He had heard stories of how a woman could plunge a dagger into your heart without doing anything physical, and now he could actually feel the pain. Later that day, he asked his boss to let him go early. Mr. Wilman nodded his head in agreement with a smile on his face. The project schedule in Fort Wayne was under control, and it turned out that Fred knew the head of it for a new potential client in Milwaukee. He had complete confidence in Fred that this acquaintance would turn into a fruitful business partnership. His wife, Natasha, will be pleased with the big bonus. Fred drove into a nearby bar and began to drown his sufferings with alcohol. By the time it was time to drive home for the final confrontation, he was under the influence of alcohol, but not drunk. He drove carefully through Chicago's notorious evening traffic jams and finally turned into his driveway. He was surprised to see that his wife's car was already in the garage. He shrugged, got out of the car, and prepared himself for the corny, "we need to talk" scenario. Sharon was sitting at the kitchen island preparing dinner. When she saw him, she stopped her work and poured coffee for both of them. "Honey, we need to talk. Talk about some decisions I've made." Fred pulled himself together before answering. "Does this concern us?" he asked, as casually as possible. Yes, it does, she sighed. There was a pregnant pause before she continued. I quit my job, she said in a low tone. Fred was stunned. He didn't expect this. I quit. Why? Fred, I don't think I spent enough time at home. To our children. And to you. I was too focused on my career like you, and our home seemed to fall by the wayside, Sharon continued. Fred didn't answer right away, but if he understood his wife's words correctly, then she chose his family and him over her lover. He looked at his wife carefully, trying to gauge her sincerity. Sharon had difficulty meeting his gaze and was breathing heavily. Her body language clearly showed that she was under enormous stress. Is now the right time to tell her that he knows. Arrange a showdown with her. She has already decided to stay with her family, so what can be achieved by a showdown? He decided to probe her a little more. Are you looking for a less demanding job? No, not yet. I want to stay home, be with you guys. I traveled like crazy at the request of my company, shifting my responsibilities as a hostess more and more onto your shoulders. And without your support, I would not have achieved the position that I have now. But every success has its own price, and I paid it by moving further and further away from the children. And from you, she finished lamely in a somewhat depressed tone. Here it is. She, in her own way, laid it all out before him. As Fred realized, based on what he already knew, but what Sharon had no idea about, Sharon had just admitted the mistake she had made, justifying that her constant travel had led to loneliness, especially in distant cities, which she was trying to overcome. By taking a lover, or perhaps this guy took advantage of her vulnerability. The truth was somewhere in the middle, and his wife had just admitted it to him. Fred said nothing as he continued to absorb what his wife had just told him. To her credit, she made her decision before he found out and confronted her, or so she thought. Secondly, a woman who wanted to repair the damage and save her marriage would not admit to having an affair, knowing full well the humiliation her husband would feel from his wife and her lover, not to mention the destruction of trust and connection. He continued to look at the sad, haggard face of his wife, the mother of his children. She was suffering, he could see it, trying to cope with the guilt of her betrayal. His confrontation should have been aimed at doing just that, to make her realize her betrayal and the humiliation she had brought upon him. No, he decided, now was not the time to tell her that he knew about her ongoing affair and demand an explanation. The image of his wife leaving her lover's house would continue to haunt him, but he understood that he also bore some responsibility for this. Perhaps he should have been more attentive to his wife's needs, because women think and feel differently. They bring new life into this world, take care of family, and have responsibility, and God created them differently than men. With all that they do, a little attention is all they look for from their man. But he was always busy trying to be the best-it guy in his company, chasing one fat bonus after another that his equally money-hungry boss promised him. He sadly admitted to himself that he had begun to take his wife for granted, not that she complained. He began to look at her as part of the team in their pursuit of wealth, the main assistant in childcare, and the efficient housekeeper who kept his travel bag ready so he could pack his things and rush to the airport in pursuit of the next bonus. He paid no attention to the woman who was behind his success. He remembered the sweet, stupid things he had said to her during their courtship that made her laugh and smile. Perhaps they weren't so stupid after all. A woman wants to feel desired, to be admired, to be pursued, wooed, and fought for, just like in the days of the cavemen. But for now, he will have to shove his wounded and humiliated cave ego into a safe locker, somewhere in the back of his mind, and throw away the key. They had to rebuild their family ties without constantly looking back at the wreckage of their lives. Having made his decision, Fred continued the conversation. I guess that means you'll just do your time in the office for now, he asked interestedly, sipping coffee. Yes, but I will do it from home. The people from my office agreed. They will appoint one of my junior staff in my place, so the transition will not take long, and I look forward to being released soon, she replied, with a sad expression on her face. True to her word, Sharon began working in their home the very next day, while making sure all household chores were completed on time. Miss Morrison was asked to leave as she was now fully in charge of the house. Now children returned from school to the smell of freshly prepared food and the presence of their mother in the house. With money from her severance package and bonus, Sharon began consulting on interior design, setting up her office in a room above the garage. She worked online through a website created by Fred. She named her company Fresha Interiors, which means Fred and Sharon. When business took off, she hired a part-time girl to handle her correspondence. By the time Fred came home, she was already dressed in nice clothes. Having learned from his past mistakes, he made sure to sit down with her and specifically discuss her day, how her consultation was going, and most importantly, he complimented her appearance, her new hairstyle, the new dress she brought, and of course the wonderful dishes which she prepared. All this time he held her hands, touched her face as if removing a stain, or even played with her hair. During these one-on-one conversations, Sharon looked into his face, absorbing every word he said, every compliment he gave her, and smiled happily back. He made sure that every evening there were always pink roses at her bedside. He almost lost her and was determined to save his family at any cost. But there were also difficulties, or rather two of them. The first was his libido. The image of his wife leaving that house hit him hard where it hurt. At times during their lovemaking, these offensive images would suddenly reappear. However, a solution was found, so every evening before leaving the office to go home, he took a pill. This solved the first problem. Everything seemed normal for several months when he began to notice changes in his wife. She seemed to have lost weight. Moreover, he began to notice that she was looking strangely into the distance. She sat with the family in a distant manner, and sometimes the children had to ask her to respond. This made Fred worry. Perhaps the fact that she sits at home all day is affecting her. He began planning impromptu outings for the family so his wife could have a change of scenery. This didn't seem to have the desired effect, and Sharon continued to look around aimlessly, sometimes just looking at him and turning away when she realized he was watching her. She continued to lose weight, her outer clothes hanging on her body like they were on a coat rack. And then an unpleasant thought struck him. Was his wife experiencing something different in bed with her lover? He wasn't sure, but he was willing to try. Fred complied, but the problem remained. Fred began to feel stressed. At the same time, his boss, who was counting on a good bonus, began to show impatience with his star performer. The deadlines kept stretching out, and his trophy wife did not want to be content with a simple monthly salary. Mr. Pan-Willman called Fred into his office, read him the riot act, and in the conversation pointedly dropped Sullivan's name. Fred didn't care about bonuses anymore. He fought to protect his family from the consequences of his greed in pursuit of bonuses. The following month, he tendered his resignation and went to work for a rival firm. The salary was less, but so was the amount of work, especially frequent trips out of town, which affected his family. He sympathized with Sullivan's family, knowing full well that his former boss was going to apply a carrot-and-stick policy to him. Then, completely unexpectedly, everything changed for the better. Sharon got pregnant. Looks like she missed taking her pills. He pulled his wife towards him and hugged her. That evening, they celebrated her pregnancy with a family dinner at one of the best family restaurants. Pregnancy turned out to be an aphrodisiac for Sharon, and she seemed to blossom overnight. This also had a positive effect on the children, or more specifically on Jane, who was delighted, while Jason seemed to be busy with other mundane matters, such as his new PlayStation. "I knew you were up to something," Jane said every now and then, looking tenderly at her mother's swollen belly. Returning from school, she constantly revolved around her mother, who carried her second brother under her heart. Needless to say, she had already decided that her little brother's name would be Dave. The school gossip coming home from Jason said that was the name of their school's star football player, and most girls of all ages had a crush on him, including Jane. Her school grades also improved because she wanted to finish everything, including her schoolwork, and then start taking care of her mother and growing brother. 9 months later, the Miller family welcomed Dave, a healthy 3-pound baby with his mother's piercing blue eyes and his father's curly brown hair. It was obvious from day one that he would be spoiled by two women in his young life, and he remained spoiled in a good way. Dave's appearance was a blessing for Fred's family. He became the center of the family, and the lives of all other family members revolved around him. Jane tried to be with her brother as much as possible, helping her mother bathe him daily, clean his ears, and change his diapers. While Sharon was busy breastfeeding Dave, Jane began brushing her mother's hair daily and applying moisturizer to her skin. The bond between mother and daughter grew stronger. As for Jason, as long as Dave didn't spill milk or do something worse on his PlayStation, he was cool. Several months later, Fred and Sharon were called to school by teacher Jane, although they were not told the reason. The perplexed parents arrived at the school where they were greeted by a smiling Miss Rogers, Jane's teacher, who apologized for the unexpected call and then showed them to the principal's office. Miss Collins looked at them through her large reading glasses and then continued her work. She closed the folder and looked them over again, as if looking for some flaws in their clothes, before starting the conversation. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I am very glad that among us there are such devoted parents as you, she said in her thunderous voice. Fred and Sharon stared at the director, not knowing what to say. Their daughter was a teenager with fairly strong feminist views, and they were expecting some awkward news. Miss Collins sort of frowned again and looked at them through her large reading glasses and then smiled. Miss Rogers, why don't you continue? She continued. Rogers steeled herself before speaking. A few days ago, we had a discussion in class about women's empowerment and emancipation. All students were asked to give examples from their personal experiences. One by one, the students began to talk about what they saw or experienced, and now it's your daughter's turn, Miss Rogers said triumphantly, as if everything was clear and understandable. And Sharon prompted, leaning forward at the same time. Jane stood up, faced the class, and said in a very proud voice that her mother was the entrepreneur of a startup company providing affordable behavioral understanding solutions to help property owners create a functional room in a building, including the shape of the room's walls, flooring, and so on. Is a competent homemaker for her young children and husband, and performs domestic work that includes cleaning, meal planning and preparation, assistance with shopping, and routine household chores. Part of what Fred had just heard seemed to go over his head, and he looked at Sharon for confirmation of what Miss Rose had said. Yes, Mr. Miller, you both set an excellent example for your children, as evidenced by what we heard from Jane. Children watch their parents and, consciously or unconsciously, try to follow in their footsteps. We see that you both have set excellent standards for your children. Rogers concluded with a happy smile. We are proud of you both and will use your example as a role model for other parents. She Collins added and handed over an envelope with a letter of gratitude from the school board. That evening, the Millers had a party at their home. Children were allowed to order whatever they wanted, from pizza to soda with sugar, and television viewing time was extended well beyond normal bedtime. They hugged each other and even played music for impromptu dancing. After many months, Fred saw his wife laughing and smiling again. Throughout the celebration, Sharon kept glancing at her husband with an expression that she had reached an important milestone in her life. Yes, she worked hard to make up for her mistake that put her family in jeopardy. Their restoration has been achieved. That night, the children decided to sleep with their mother in their bedroom. Jane decided to sleep on the side where her little brother's crib was. She was a self-proclaimed mother to her younger brother and tried to be as close to him as possible all the time. Jason was on the other side of his mother, which meant that the family moved Fred into the living room in front of the TV. He didn't mind it. The kids were happy and Sharon was happy, and that was all that mattered. He poured himself some strong drink and thought about everything that had happened in their lives. Sharon worked hard, there was no doubt about it, and he was proud of her accomplishments as both a homemaker and a businesswoman. It's funny, almost 2 years ago, if someone had asked this question, he wasn't sure he would have answered it. Now, even the image of Sharon leaving her house in Milwaukee didn't hurt him as much. He could still hear the animated conversation between Sharon and the children. He took his cell phone and purchased a ruby ring online, which Sharon would receive the next day from the jewelry store via a special courier. He then booked a room at the Hilton for the two of them. The next night, he was going to make love to his woman in a very special way. Finally, he sent his wife a WhatsApp message about booking a room with the text, "We have a date tomorrow, Mrs. Miller." Yes, their restoration was successfully completed. Time seemed to freeze as they looked at each other. Tears flowed freely down Sharon's cheeks, and she trembled. "You knew about my betrayal, but you never confronted me. I'm sad that you know about this, and I'm very sorry for the humiliation I caused you, the pain of betrayal," she continued. "Believe me when I say I never wanted this to happen. There was nothing about him that you don't have. You are the best a woman can dream of. The time has come for the confrontation that was postponed until the last moment, so many years ago. I won't ask how many times you did this with him, but I would like to know why. Maybe there was something missing in me," Fred asked in a cautious tone, trying his best not to let his pent-up anger spill out. Sharon turned to look him in the face and shook her head vigorously. "No, Fred, you can't blame you. There was never anything lacking in you, and I mean that in every sense of the word," she responded quickly. "So you were looking for something new?" "No, Fred, I could never deceive you and the children," she answered decisively. "But you changed, didn't you? Let me try to tell it the best way I can explain it, Fred." "Please be patient with me," she said to him. She seemed to have aged in those last few moments. Those were the days when we just started building our house. We recently purchased our 4-bedroom home with a beautiful backyard where we built a safe play area for our children. Before we saw this house, we had chosen a house in a relatively less affluent area and also cheaper. But you wanted the best for your family. You wanted small children to have an open space to run and play, so we chose this house, which met all our requirements, although it was more expensive. A few months later, you gave me a new Honda SUV because you didn't like me driving a used car. I was delighted and proudly wore it to meet clients in their office. I was in ninth heaven. How does all this relate to your leaving our marriage?" Sharon nodded and continued. "I realize that we don't save much because so many payments are deducted. A home loan, car loans for both of our cars, loans for household appliances. After all these deductions, we didn't save much for the future. I saw how you worked hard, took on more and more work so that the bonuses you received would help pay off the loans. There have been times when you came home from the office only to change into fresh clothes and rush to your flight without having a proper dinner. I started to worry about your health, about your safety. I knew you were doing all this for us, but I didn't like it. I personally felt like your boss was taking advantage of your need to earn more by assigning you more difficult projects." Fred looked up sharply at Sharon, who had voiced his boss's actions. This was what he also guessed, although with some delay. She took a deep breath before continuing. "Then I decided to be shoulder to shoulder with you. The company expanded, and I began to take on more and more assignments outside the city. My boss was happy because I was one of the top marketing executives, but our lives were getting more and more hectic. Do you remember, Fred, those days when you would come back on the evening flight and I would take the next morning flight?" Fred nodded. He could barely rest for about an hour after returning home before driving Sharon to the airport for her flight. It was hard, it was tiring, but by the end of the month, our bank balance started to increase by a healthy amount. Sharon paused, breathing heavily, then continued. "This constant struggle for balance between responsibilities at home and meetings in the office outside the city began to tire me. I felt tired and stressed. At times I thought about curtailing my business travel, but watching you maintain your hectic schedule, I was determined to continue because if I slipped up, the responsibility would fall solely on your shoulders. And this is where your boyfriend came into your life." Sharon winced when she heard this. "I think I deserve it," she answered and nodded her head. "Jim Thornton worked in our client's office in Milwaukee. At this point, Sharon stopped and looked at Fred to gauge his reaction to the mention of her boyfriend's name. Frank said nothing and continued to look ahead. We talked every time I was there because he invariably represented his company. He was good at his job and also became our self-appointed guide to his city. After the meeting, he took us to eateries, places with good discounts, and so on. He was witty and charming, and somehow managed to convince me to take what he called a walk around the city and then fly home. I didn't see anything wrong with it since I had to kill time. By then, Sharon was white as a sheet. She truthfully described to Fred the capabilities of another man who eventually went to bed with her. Frank mentally replayed what his wife had just said in his head and wondered. This guy was a good worker and a courteous conversationalist. Is that really all it takes for his wife to go to bed with him? An involuntary sob escaped her as she saw her husband clenching his fist. Her shoulders sagged in shame. True to his word, Fred did not interfere and waited for Sharon to continue her story. Thanks to these regular meetings, I learned something about his life. He had a little daughter at home. Several years ago, he lost his wife in a car accident and raised his daughter alone. It got me thinking about our kids, the ups and downs we face raising them together, and here is this guy doing it alone. My sympathy for him increased, a feeling of caring appeared, and I began to often ask him about his life outside of work. Sharon didn't look at her husband's face as she said those words, knowing full well that he must be in pain, but she had to confess. Fred continued to look forward, with a distant expression on his face. It hurt him, really hurt him, when his wife talked about the feelings she had for another man. How could she do this? Another time, we visited a carnival. I haven't attended a carnival for a long time and really enjoyed it. This was followed by another visit to an establishment where Charleston dancing was performed. Jim was witty, charming, and I began to think of these moments as my me time, when there were no pressing schedules and my flight in the morning was hours away, she said, bowing her head. This is where everything went wrong, she continued. I could try to justify myself by saying that I drank too much, or that he was a good seducer, but the truth is that I never resisted him. I should have known better, but my head was in the wrong place. Was he good in bed? Upon hearing this, Sharon began to sob uncontrollably, as the next part would be difficult for her. After we had sex, I asked myself the same question over and over again as you why. Trust me when I say there was nothing unusual about him. I guess every time there is a man and a woman, do this, it's different from what happens to the other person. But other than that, there was nothing, Sharon said, all the while looking at her hands lying on your knees. I was in inner turmoil. One part said that I should not meet this guy, and the other voice urged me to meet this witty and charming man again. I lay awake many nights thinking about the mess I had made. I have always believed that the truth cannot be hidden, and one day you will find out about my stupid infatuation with Jim. It could burn me, destroy my family. The thought of you feeling humiliation and betrayal shook me to the core. Then his calls and messages on WhatsApp became more frequent and more personal. He began to write to me, even when I was at home. Then I decided to end this stupid romance. I knew that because of my infatuation with him, it would be difficult for me to make this decision. Therefore, it was best to leave the environment that poisoned my family life. I quit and decided, for some time, not to get another job, devoting all my time to my family. I knew it would hurt us financially, and you might have to do more projects out of town for your greedy boss, but now it was acceptable to me. However, I decided to create my own company because I knew that I had talent and could make a contribution, no matter how small it might be. But thoughts about the reasons for my betrayal continued to haunt me, and I started going to a psychologist. Fred looked at his wife. You never told me about this. What could I tell you? Honey, I just ended an affair with a guy, but since I'm not sure why I did it, I'm planning to go to a psychologist. Would you like to come with me? Ha, it was my mess, and therefore my responsibility. I've already done enough damage, and I didn't want to hurt you by telling you about my infidelity. How long did the sessions last? Once a week or 10 days for 2 months. In the first couple of meetings, the consultant asked me to tell her about myself, about my childhood, about my growing up years, about our family life, and so on. She then started asking me about my office work, my frequent travel, and then about Jim. I told her everything honestly, leaving nothing out because it wasn't about me, it was about my wonderful family and how I could make things better for them. I told her about going to the carnival with Jim, about going to shops and cafes, and then, Sharon paused. She looked intently at her husband's face, trying to understand his feelings, his emotions. She didn't hide anything. For many years, she kept her guilt to herself, and now she could no longer endure it. There were different feelings playing out inside Fred, and he felt uneasy. Hearing from her own lips how she spent time in Milwaukee with Jim and then started an affair made him feel bad. He felt that she was moving away from him and therefore began to reduce his frequent trips, but he was unpleasant to hear this from his wife. "You could always talk to me about what was on your mind," he said. "In my mind, I wanted to be shoulder to shoulder in the construction of our home, and so I was always focused on what needed to be done next, at home or in the office. So many times I've watched you run into the house, only to run out again for the next flight, and I wasn't going to let you kill yourself by burning out." "I had nothing to complain about or talk to you about," she answered, looking unwaveringly into her husband's eyes. "What did the consultant say?" Fred asked, refraining from commenting on his wife's answer for now. "The consultant said that I couldn't cope with the stressful routine I was doing. I felt a growing sense of guilt for not being with my children as often as I should have. I was worried that you would burn out and have health problems, but in fact, it was me who burned out trying to cope with the family and the office with his frequent travel." As the consultant said, when I found out that Jim was raising his daughter alone, it caused a wave of strong maternal feelings in me. My mind took this as an opportunity to overcome the guilt of ignoring my children. Impromptu visits after work to popular shopping streets, coffee in quaint coffee shops, were the result of a wave of maternal emotions that overwhelmed my body. I started playing the role of his damn mother, and over time I started sleeping with him. But then, when I was in a healthier mood, I had a guilt hangover. She gave me the address of a psychiatrist who could help me. According to the psychiatrist, the fact that I voluntarily left the miserable situation in which I found myself was a good sign that all was not lost. He gave me a medical prescription and advised me not to get a full-time job until things got better. The situation really started to improve, and after a long time, I felt happy and secure with my family. Then my worst nightmares came true when I found out that you knew about my infidelity." "How did you know?" Fred asked curiously. "Remember when your office threw a party to celebrate the completion of the project in Fort Wayne much ahead of schedule? So I was mingling among the guests when Sheila from your accounts department ran up to me. She praised your efforts in getting this project off the ground much ahead of schedule. She went on to say that not only did you complete this project, but you also landed an equally large client in Milwaukee, and that you were willing to travel from Fort Wayne to Milwaukee to make the presentation in person. At that moment, my world collapsed around me. You never mentioned visiting Milwaukee, and now Sheila tells me you did it often. Somehow, I managed to maintain my composure, but life after that party became miserable. I was on edge all day long, expecting at any moment that there would be a knock on the door and hand over divorce papers. There were days when I didn't do consulting, but just sat in one place for hours on end. All this time I've been waiting for you to file me with divorce papers. This began to affect my health, and I began to lose weight. I'm sure that if I turned to a psychiatrist again, he would send me to a mental hospital. Then I cheated on you again." Fred looked at her in surprise. "I decided to have a child. I desperately wanted my family to always be there for me, and you, being a true gentleman, would never kick a pregnant woman out of the house. I deceived you by not discussing the issue of having a child and not taking the pills," Sharon continued with a defiance on her face. Fred sat back and stared in amazement at the woman standing in front of him. She did just about everything she could, giving up work, tending to the house around the clock, and doing counseling to bring in much-needed money. But the guilt continued to gnaw at her soul, and now she could no longer keep her secret. Even as he continued to feel the familiar caveman's anger at being deceived, he felt sorry for his wife. She single-handedly made many decisions to keep their marriage intact. I think that now you will divorce me after all, who can live with a cheater. I understand this and will not demand anything from you. You can keep the house, our investments, everything. You can divide our savings account as you see fit. I won't fight for anything and will be content with what my consulting firm pays me. But I have a request. Please never suspend me from a single family event, and please, I would like us to remain friends, Sharon exclaimed. Fred could see that she was on edge. She kept her secret to herself and was racked with guilt for years, worse than PTSD. He saw her fade before his eyes. He had to act quickly to save her, to save them, otherwise she would truly turn into a basket. He no longer felt that familiar pain and anger, but instead he began to think through a carefully thought-out response. Fred wrapped his arms around his wife and looked intently into her frightened and helpless eyes. The affair took its toll. He took a deep breath before speaking, as if with this action he had forever torn and burned the mental picture of his wife leaving her lover's house, an image that had been so deeply imprinted in his mind for a long time. What happened happened, and his wife's actions clearly showed the ordeal that had befallen her due to her indiscretion. She chose to fight and suffer alone. When you say that you are to blame for the betrayal, do not forget to include me, because I am also responsible. My greed to climb the corporate ladder, to make more and more money at the first opportunity, put us in a situation where this happened. Whose idea was it to buy this house in an upper-middle-class neighborhood? It was mine because I wanted what was best. We could have chosen another house that was on our list, but this would have meant that the children would not be able to attend the prestigious school located here. Then that Jeep I surprised you with. It could wait. You weren't complaining, but I saw the way you looked at some of the cars in our area, and so I just had to get you a brand new car, better than these. So I splurged on an SUV. Fred paused and looked at his wife to see how she took it. Sharon looked at him with her mouth half open, her pupils dancing in her eyes. But you have to pay for everything. Our children were young, and that meant a lot of homeschooling, while our dreams required more and more hard work. The time when we could be together, share our feelings, faded into the background. We faded into the background, so to speak. We began to look less like a couple and more like two roommates living under one roof. You were completely immersed in the duties of a housewife, and the next morning you were rushing to the office or flying to a meeting with a client. I was also chasing my dream of getting the next big bonus. Somewhere there, we stopped giving each other the time we needed. Why didn't you confess to me? She asked, uncertainty. She expected a verbal onslaught, which did not seem to come. Fred hugged her tighter. Of course, I wanted to, but in my own way. When I first realized we were growing apart, I started working less in the office. Do you remember the packages you received in your office via courier? Those lunch dates, just the two of us again? Sharon nodded her head in understanding. Beautiful pink roses by my bed, impromptu family outings, dinner dates with hotel reservations, she added, a knowing look in her eyes. We Millers know how to fight and choose our weapons of war accordingly, whether on the beaches of Omaha with a bayonet or with flowers and love, lots of love, Fred answered in an unyielding tone. You were and are the love of my life, the mother of my children, the support of my whole life, and I could never be cruel to you, even with harsh words. This guy was in the right place at the right time and got the chance to be in the company of the most beautiful soul in the world. No matter how hard he tries, he will never be able to find your twin sister to try his luck again, because God only created one of you, and she was meant to be mine. Sharon smiled at her husband through her tears. Thank you again for always being with me, she whispered. So what now? She continued uncertainly. Fred smiled and picked up the shopping bag he had brought. The battle was won. Now Fred Miller is getting impatient here and would like to start his Saturday in real earnest with his woman in the bedroom. Mr. Miller, this woman belongs only to her man. With a wave of her hand, Sharon took the bag from the table and threw it into the trash can. Mr. Miller, will you take me to our bedroom now? Their time was interrupted by Sharon's phone ringing. It was her daughter calling. Hey, Mom, how's your weekend going? I hope my son doesn't bother you. Sharon smiled. Jane began to call her younger brother her son and was very protective of him. She even argued with her if she scolded Dave. She looked lovingly at her husband's face. They had devoted enough time to raising their beautiful children, and the answer to their daughter's question about the whereabouts of her youngest son could wait. Jane, honey, I'm in the process of fulfilling my marital duties, so maybe we can find you later. Lord, Mom, will you never stop? Her daughter screamed, more from joy than from anything else. I hope you guys aren't planning another surprise for us, because now it's Jason, and it's my turn to give you a bunch of surprises. Fred looked at his sleeping wife and began stroking her face. The long-awaited conversation finally took place, and the ghost of the past was finally put to rest. But there was something he didn't tell her and wasn't going to tell her. After that fateful night, when he saw Sharon leaving Jim's house, he flew to Milwaukee again to meet Jim. He waited for him in the office parking lot and then met him face to face. He wanted to get to know this man personally to understand what it was about him that almost destroyed his family. Jim was taken aback and became defensive when he introduced himself as Sharon's husband. They got into his car and Fred spoke. He told him about how Sharon quit her job and refused to take another job, instead deciding to become a full-time housewife, as if to atone for her mistake. Jim sat and listened silently as Fred took out his anger on the man. You ruined her career, destroyed her self-esteem with your desire for her. How selfish and disgusting you are. Don't tell me you were in love with Sharon. You knew that she was married and had a family, but you pursued her for your own selfish purpose with your charming and witty behavior. Jim started to say something, but then fell silent, perhaps not wanting to make a scene in the office parking lot. Tell me, Jim, how would you feel if our positions were reversed and you found out that I slept with your wife? The conversation about his dead wife hit him hard, and he glared at Fred, who stared back impassively. When Jim looked away, Fred knew he had won. I don't want to see you next to my wife or even in correspondence with her. Remember, you are the only parent for your daughter, and if I find out that you won't leave her alone, then your employer and my wife's former employer will learn a lot about you. This is war, and I will create hell for you and make sure that you will never find a decent job. Wherever you go, I will follow you. My wife left her job, but I will always be there to provide for my family. But if you remain unemployed, who will feed your daughter? Think, Jim, think carefully before you run after a married woman again. With that final warning shot, Fred got out of the car and walked away without looking back.